was back in college. And it was a mistake that specifically had to do with the understanding of the idea of effort. Okay? And my issue was I drank my mom's Kool-Aid because my mom made me believe that I was just super smart and that I was really the smartest kid, and like my mom was a very supportive, encouraging woman. And this was a big mistake to constantly pump me full of this like, oh, you're so smart, and you're so this, and you're so... And so I really believed I could just show up on exam day, and I would just, I'd pass my exams. And for the first 2 years of college, I, mostly did that. And then junior year comes around, and this class called organic chemistry. Anyone here taken organic chemistry before? All right. Organic chemistry showed up into my life, and I showed up, and exam day came, and let's just say I did not pass. I did not do very well. So mom's like, what happened? And I'm like, I don't know. Can't put my finger on it. I couldn't imagine what could have possibly gone wrong. And then I sat and I thought about it, and it hit me. It hit me. I didn't study. I didn't put any effort into learning the material. I didn't try to get better. I didn't try to learn organic chem. Now, I am thankful I never have to take another organic chem class ever again. Okay? It was the bane of my existence. But I also know something. I learned something very important from that class, which is if I would have just studied, if I would have actually shown up, if I would have done my part, I think quite a bit would have been different. I think in life in general we make a lot of big mistakes, but the good news is there's a lot of simple solutions that go along with those big mistakes. Some of those big mistakes are things as big as living a prideful life. Some of those things might also include overperforming, pushing ourselves to extreme limits, working ourselves till we're like going to collapse. Always thinking that we are correct. Whether that's in our own spiritual lives, in our family lives, in the workplace, can be a huge mistake. Poor communication, big mistake. And focusing on numbers sometimes can become a big mistake. Why focus on the numbers? Isn't it better just to focus on the good stuff? Someone asked me this question once. It was something that Maura and I, we questioned ourselves early on in our relationship. And then we read this book called The Lasting Promise. And in The Lasting Promise, talks about how the goal of marriage is to bring a man and a woman together for them to experience deep personal intimacy. But the author also suggests that there are certain things that prevent us from experiencing deep intimacy. And one of the big things is communication, poor communication. And so he spoke in the first couple of chapters about 4 habits that prevent intimacy. And he actually suggests, he says, like a lot of people say, why focus on the problems? He says, because if you don't, you can pretend like everything's good, but the mistakes, the issues, the problems will still be there. Okay? So he says if we get to the core of the issue, we deal with the mistakes, then we can build up some other good stuff. Okay? And that's what I want to do in this series. I want us to look at some of the big mistakes that we face as a people, and what are some of the simple solutions that we can use in order to address those mistakes. Our series principle is that life's biggest pitfalls are avoidable. They are correctable with proper awareness, orientation, and effort. Okay? We've got to be aware. We've got to properly orient ourselves. And importantly, we have to be willing to exercise a certain level of effort. Those 3 things that are needed. Like, I have to be aware. When I finally realized that I failed my exam, it was because I came to this awareness. This awareness that I need to actually study. That like I'm not as smart as I thought I was, if you will. Okay? And then I had to start orienting myself and say, okay, I'm gonna go and show up, and I'm going to spend more time in school. And I'm going to spend more time with my books in the library. But I needed to, very importantly, exercise some effort, because knowing it and putting myself in the right place without exercising enough effort would have done nothing for me. It's the same idea, by the way, understanding I need God. There's an awareness. Orienting myself, coming to church, showing up for church. I'm present. I'm orienting myself, generally speaking. And then I hear a message about prayer, about reading, and I'm like, I know it, but then I walk out and I don't do anything with it. Don't do anything with it. So I'm in the presence of God where His grace can work, but I don't allow myself to access it because I'm unwilling to do something about it. All I want to tell y'all is the mistakes, I believe, are very, very avoidable. They're very correctable, but we've got to be willing to become a bit more self-aware, direct ourselves back to God, back to the truth, and do something about it. Since next week is our Invite a Friend Sunday, I figured we'd open today with a numbers game. Okay? Next Sunday, we've encouraged the church to invite a friend from school, from work, next door neighbor, someone you meet in the street, like just invite them out, invite them to come out. Okay? And very importantly, I want to discuss this because I want us to have the right understanding of why. What is our motivation behind inviting folks? Is it to have a packed house? Is it just to have people showing up? Is it just, people in the, we're not pews here, but in the carpet, wherever y'all are sitting, all right? What is the reason? And should we focus on growing numbers as a community or not? Is there a problem with counting? Is there something wrong with it? Well, I'd like us to turn our attention to the Old Testament. 2 Samuel chapter 24, we're going to look at. We're going to also look at 1 Chronicles 21 and Exodus chapter 30. All right? Let's start with 2 Samuel 24. And just to give you a little bit of background, King David calls one of his trusted people and invites him. It's one of the commanders, actually, of the army. And he invites him, and he asks him, he wants him to do something for him. Okay? And it seems very, very, very harmless what he asks him to do. Okay? He asks him basically, like, let's have a census. Let's figure out how many people. Let's figure out how many people are in the kingdom. How many people are in church, if you will. Like, let's figure out how many people are here today. 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1 and 2. Again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and He moved David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah. Okay? So it says here that God actually moves David. We're going to understand something in just a minute. Like, why would He do this if it's something wrong? So the king said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, now go throughout all the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and count the people, that I may know the number of the people. So he basically commissions Joab to go out and to do a census of all the people in Israel. And this ends up being a big problem. We're going to look at the corresponding text in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, because it starts off a little bit different. Okay? In 2 Samuel here it says, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and He moved David against them to say. Now in 1 Chronicles 21, it says, now Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. Well, do y'all see what's going on? One text says God moved. Next one says Satan moved. All right? Let's continue. So David said to Joab and to the leaders of the people, go number Israel from Beersheba to Dan and bring the number of them to me that I may know it. Now this next part is very important. Joab answered, may the Lord make His people 100 times more than they are, but my Lord, he's like, listen up. The king, are they not all my Lord's servants? Why then does my Lord require this thing? Why should he be a cause of guilt in Israel? The commander is challenging the king now and saying, like, why do we need to count the people? There's going to be guilt against all the people of Israel. Let's look at one more text and then we'll kind of unpack this together. Exodus chapter 30. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you take the census of the children of Israel for their number, then every man shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord. When you number them, that there may be no plague among them when you number them. Okay? So, a couple things that are going on here. Number one is the right to count only belongs to the person who owns. Okay? What's happening here is God is commanding Moses, he's commissioning Moses to go and to do a census because these people belong to God. He's the king. He's the king. If y'all are familiar with the game Monopoly, when you own a piece of property, anyone who lands on that property pays you rent, right? Now, the way we play is if someone touches my Monopoly card, like that's like hands might be coming off or something. Like you don't touch someone's Monopoly card to see who's paying rent to who. The person who owns it is responsible for it. You own it, okay? And anyone who lands on that pays to the person who owns that property. It's the same in the Bible. Whoever is within the kingdom of God is owned by God. They belong to God. This word, this Hebrew word, melech, it means king, like Malik, right? Or Malik, but it also, and those of you who know Arabic, and I've offered this to you before, it also means owner, someone who owns. So the king, implicit in the word here, by the way, implicit in this Hebrew word, is that the king is also the owner. So anyone within the dominion, within the kingdom, the dominion of the king, belongs to that person. They are owned by this person. And so what happens here is that David has this pride of sin and he falls into it. He falls, his sin is the sin of pride of numbers. He's this great king. Remember early on, when he was conquering all these kingdoms and he was conquering all these other armies, the people were singing for Saul. They were saying, Saul has conquered this many, and then they would come to David and they'd say, but David has conquered even more people. So David starts falling into the pride of numbers. How many people belong to me? God allows Satan, and if you're familiar with the beginning of Job chapter 1 in the Old Testament, basically talks about how Satan, the devil, he wanders up into heaven, and God basically allows him to go and to tempt, if you will, Job. Okay? So the discrepancy between 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles there is that God is allowing Satan to test or to tempt David in order to reveal the pride that David has in his numbers, his own self-pride. And in the process here, what God is doing is he's refining, he's disciplining, and he's purifying David, and as a result, all of Israel. Now, if y'all remember, the king, the commander was aware, and mind you, so was David. King David. 1 Chronicles 21. It says, so David, after this is over, so David said to God, I have sinned greatly. He was aware of his sin, right? He was aware of this big mistake. David said to God, I have sinned greatly because I have done this thing, but now I pray, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. He was aware. We're seeing this, right? He was aware, but that's the important thing is here is awareness is not enough. David knew what he was doing. He realized it after the fact as well. That's why if we want to overcome these big mistakes, these pitfalls, we've got to be aware, we've got to orient ourselves to the truth, to God, to the Word, and we have to exercise an effort to do what it is we're orienting ourselves towards, to participate with the grace of God. to work collaboratively with God's grace. Our will, our effort, if you will, has to participate with God's grace. Has to participate with that which we're orienting ourselves towards. The result of this sin we find in 1 Chronicles 21. So David's aware. He says, like, God, I've really messed up. And in Chronicles 21, verse 9, it says, Then the Lord spoke to Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and tell David, saying, Thus says the Lord, I offer you 3 things. Choose one of them for yourself, that I may do it to you. And so what happens now is God tells David 3 things are going to happen. Either something's going to happen for 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years. Like, he basically gives him 3 options. And David's like he begs God. He's like, please don't do this. Please don't do this. And it still happened. But ultimately, David says, give me the shortest one. Give me the 3-day one. Okay? And in it, 70,000 people fall. 70,000 people. People were affected by David's decision, by his big mistake. Folks, this is not a small thing to focus on numbers. And it's important for us to do so, because as we grow as a community, it's so easy to get tempted into numbers, the numbers game. And the reason I take this to heart is because we as a community, we don't want to lose folks along the journey because we're so fixated on numbers. We can get so fixed on growing numbers-wise and money-wise and building-wise and all that stuff that as a result, we'll lose people along the journey. 70,000 people fell that day. 70,000 people. Our sin impacts other people. Saint Salvian, he was a 5th century saint, Christian writer from Gaul, which is in modern-day France. He says, the church of God is as the eye. A speck of dirt, even though small, which falls into the eye, blinds the sight completely. In the same way, some, even though they are few in the body of the church, commit filthy acts, they block almost all the light of the splendor of the church. He was commenting here on this passage. Okay? So when we do something that is a filthy act, that sounds very harsh. Okay? But that's the way they saw it, is that it was something so outside of the will of God. Something so outside of God himself. It was a complete rebellion against God to get so preoccupied with numbers. That became the primary goal, if you will. Okay? So David asks for personal discipline. The discipline still comes upon Israel, and lots of people affected by David's decision. What's happening here, guys, is this. Who is responsible for counting the people? It's God. What has David done? David has counted the people. He's made himself a god. He self-worships. This is not a small thing. Okay? And this is why this huge discipline comes upon the leader and the people that he leads. Numbers, very importantly, are not the primary goal. When the number is our goal, 3 things I believe happen. Number 1 is we begin to think we own what we're counting. We think it belongs to us. Even when we say the right thing. Folks, I've been in church for years now. People are like, oh yeah, the church is growing by God's grace. Like people, like you'll throw something on the end there like, oh yeah, we built this huge church and it's great, it's wonderful. And people are like, look, oh, by God's grace, of course. We raised $3 million to build this project. By God's grace, of course. Okay. So many people are coming. By God's grace, of course. Even when we throw that little thing on the end, God knows the heart. We can't fool anyone. We can't fool God. We might fool ourselves even at times. We might fool other people. But we definitely will not and cannot fool God. What happens is we begin to think that we own, that thing belongs to us, that person belongs to us, that organization, that community, or that job, or that our family, or our money, or whatever it is, belongs to us. We begin to take credit for our grades. We begin to take credit for our personal wealth, our spiritual growth, our fundraising, our building projects. We begin to take credit for converts. No none of us are doing, God is working through his people. Remember what St. Paul says, Paul planted, Apollos watered. Who brings the increase? It's Christ. Even when people are joining the church, we're simply saying, God, like we're in your hands. Like you are using us. We are grateful for you to use us, but we don't know any of this stuff. Like this doesn't belong to us. Number 2 is, as a result of this, relationships begin to struggle to grow more deeply. I think when we start seeing numbers and we start focusing on numbers, there begins to be a superficiality to the relationships. And let me tell you, like, one of the first places this can hit is the home. When we get so fixated on work or on ministry, and that it's all about growing everything, what it can do is it can deeply impact our relationships at home, with our spouse, with our kids, with parents, with our siblings. So we're running the rat race. We've got numbers to crunch. We've got to keep on moving. Okay? And so this affects the most important thing that God has given us, which is relationships with other people. Okay? He says, like, love God and love your neighbor. He invites us into community with him and with each other. And unfortunately, like, when we are constantly chasing after numbers, and I understand we're in that world, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but we've got to understand that this deeply impacts our relationships with each other. Number 3 is, as a result, people begin to slip through the cracks. Okay? People begin to slip through the cracks. At home, church, friends. I can't tell you how many people. Someone was just telling me last week, I went to go see a friend of mine, and he said, like, Luna, people are leaving the church. And I was like, yeah, I mean, he goes, no, I mean, by a lot of people are leaving, like, he was talking about his specific parish. And he goes, but nobody notices because the church is still full. Right? Because the relationships are no longer deep. Because the focus is on numbers. It's about growing. It's about more. It's about, we need to have another service, another building, and we need to have another this, another that, and we just keep packing people in, bringing people in, and that's the focus, is growing. And then the relationships become more and more superficial, more shallow, and then people just start slipping out. Now, I'm not suggesting that communities can't grow larger and maintain deep relationships and personal relationships, but oftentimes, when the primary focus is on numbers, people start slipping through the cracks. Okay? People get forgotten because they are seen as a measure of success. Measure of success. I think the true measure of success is the evidence of people choosing and living in a life-changing path with Christ. The true measure of success. If people ask me, like, is the church growing successfully? I would say, for me to know that, I've got to be able to answer this question. That people are, those of us who come to be in the body, are choosing and living differently with Jesus Christ. If you want to ask me, like, are we successful as a community? I would say absolutely. Because I see more and more people choosing to live in a deeply personal, intimate relationship with God. That is the measure of success, folks. It's not how many people we get on a Sunday morning. It's not. Like, those numbers, it's good, it's encouraging. But that is success right there. People are choosing to live a more personal, deep, intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. That being said, numbers do matter in Scripture. We find numbers all throughout Scripture. On the day of Pentecost, the people were numbered. 3,000 people were converted on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. In Luke 15, you have the shepherd leaves the 99 in order to get the one sheep. The parable of the talents, there's 5, 2, and 1 parable, or 1 talent. And the one with the 1 talent who does nothing with it, he gets reprimanded. The ones with the 5 and the 2 that do something with it, they're commended by Christ. Numbers matter only because people matter to Christ. Numbers matter so much that people matter to Christ. God is not willing that even one would perish. That's why he leaves the 99 and says, let me go get that one. In that respect, absolutely numbers matter. Numbers matter so much, that we're talking about the salvation of souls. Numbers do not matter in so much that we're talking about how many people showed up to church today, or how much money was in the box, or how many square feet the building is. Numbers don't matter in that regard, but they do matter when we're talking about salvation of souls. We are called to grow. We are called to grow. When people keep asking me, though, how is the church, is it growing? I think there's 4 layers that we got to look at with growth. Okay? And the reason I can't stand this question, I honestly loathe this question. I hate this question when I get it. Like, I despise this question. Do you get a feeling of how I feel about this question? I can't stand this question because I know that everyone that asks me, or the vast majority of people who ask me, their primary concern is with the very first layer, which is numbers. Okay? When people ask, oh, is the church growing? Oh, don't worry, the church will grow. The primary concern is how many people do you have in church? How many families? Because I'm like, what do you mean by that? They say, well, how many families do you have in church? How many people show up on Sunday? That is the primary concern with growth. And so I never answer that question. I say the community is doing well. They're growing spiritually, which is the second layer that I'll suggest. But for me, that's actually the first layer. Because the first breeds the second. If the community is growing spiritually deeper, that will breed growth of numbers, without question. And that's usually what I tell people. I said, well, we're focusing right now on growing spiritually. And people are coming. That's not our primary concern. People are inviting their friends. People are inviting like others that they know. People are sharing like what God is doing amongst the community. That's not the primary concern for us. Primary concern is not, let's get more food, let's get more plates at the table. Primary concern is, let's get some good food on the table. And let's get people fed. People that are showing up, we want to make sure these people are fed. These people are eating well. And other people will say, we want to eat too. And that's the second layer of growth that we're talking about. The third layer of growth is in corporate effectiveness. It's in getting strong, it's in getting ourselves organized, because as the community grows, as you suggested during the discussion section, more of us start getting involved in doing things to help, because there's more people to be fed. There's more people to eat. Okay? And so everyone starts saying, like, what can I do? How can I help? Let me pass mashed potatoes and gravy down to you. Let me cut up that turkey and pass it down your way. Okay? Let me butter your bread for you while you serve the person next to you. Someone gave a really beautiful analogy. They said that heaven, the only, like, spoons are like this long. Okay? Spoons are this long. Alright? And in heaven, with these long spoons, like, you can't feed yourself with a spoon, like, if it's this long, right? How do you get to yourself? And so what happens in heaven, this is just an analogy, okay? Like, don't walk out of here thinking like, man, I want to have like an even bigger one, all right? But what happens is we serve one another, we feed one another. We don't feed ourselves. Okay? We're there to help one another. That's the growth in corporate effectiveness, is that more of us get involved and serve one another and help one another and give to one another. And then the last layer, which we need to grow into still, is in transforming the outside world. Because as we grow and as we begin to be healthier, we have to transform the world. That's what Christ actually sent his disciples to do. He sent them into the world to make disciples of all nations. And so next week I invite you to bring folks with you, to invite folks with you. And for those who you're not able to bring with you, that you go and you be the light in that place, to transform the world where you're at. Simple solution. Simple solution. By the way, simple does not mean easy. Simple does not equal easy. Simple means simple, but it might be difficult at the same time. All right? The very, very simple solution for this week is we've got to be present in order to overcome the numbers game. We have to be present. We have to be here, not here. Okay? When we are in a situation, if you're at work, be present in what you're doing. Okay? For the statistician who's here, whose job is to focus on numbers, you want to be present at work. Okay? For the doctor, you want to be present with your patients. For the teachers, you want to be present with your students. Because if all we're thinking about is what we've got to do next, the next thing, that's the numbers. If all we're thinking about is, I got to do this and this and this and this, it prevents us from being present. If our mind is constantly cluttered, and we're thinking about all the things that we got to do and want to do and need to do and are excited about doing, it robs us of the joy of being present with God and with one another, and with the people that He's put in our path. When we are present, I believe it allows us to restore and repair what we have. It allows us, when we are present with one another, it allows us to restore what God is doing amongst us, to repair our own lives and to be involved in the lives of other people, to repair, to rebuild. So it's not just about saying, okay, we got to go out and do all this stuff outside. It's about, hey, we're here with each other, let's help one another, let's get involved in each other's lives. Our small community here, that as a family, we're here to help each other, to build one another up. And I promise you, if you look around this room, some of us, we've got a lot of deep hurt going on. Part of what it means for us to be present with one another is that we open ourselves up to one another to serve one another, to feed one another, to restore and to repair the hurt, the wounds that have happened out in the world, or that have happened in past experiences, even in other communities, in other church communities, or maybe have happened right here in Princeton. Second thing that it allows us to do when we are present is allows us to be patient. It allows us to be patient, to wait. Say, I know the time will come. I'm just not there yet. Number three is it allows us to be open-handed. Realizing we don't own what's in front of us. We don't own other people. We don't own the money that we have. God has just called us to be stewards. You know, in the liturgy we say, we give to you from what you've given to us. We're just offering back to Him what He's entrusted us. When we make an offering to God, folks, this is God's money. We're just simply saying, like, God, like, He's gracious enough to say, here you go. And we're like, we give thanks back to you. We're just giving back to you what you've already given to us. And the last thing is it allows us to remain faithful. Just to say, like, right now, this is what's in front of us. Let's just focus on what's in front of us. Let's remain faithful to the people and to the people that are in our lives, to the jobs that God has called us to the opportunities that He's placed us in. Let's just be faithful with that. Next week, I mentioned that we are inviting, I really want to encourage you to invite others next Sunday. But the motivation is key, folks. And if you're not there, then I discourage you from inviting anyone. Okay? I discourage you from inviting anyone. If the primary focus is we just want to get this place packed, please do not invite anyone next Sunday. That is a really bad way to get people to bring people to church, right? But my concern, more importantly, is just to make sure that my brothers and sisters are doing it for the right place here. Because we are all responsible for one another. We're all responsible for this place. As we invite others, please invite others to share with them what you have personally experienced. What God has done in your life. The last thing I want to encourage you to do is go tell people, like, hey, come to this place. The people there are really sweet and nice. Okay? I want to encourage you, like, invite others to come and experience what God has done in your life. We want to keep our eyes fixed on Christ, fixed on Jesus, and what He's doing amongst His people here. And what you've seen Him do in the lives of other people. Maybe He's done something profound in someone else's life. And that's a story that you want to share with others. Maybe He's still working something through with you, and that's inspired you based on what you've seen with others. It's that you just let's share with others and with one another what God is doing in our lives. Very importantly, though, as we invite others, just drop a seed. Don't be pushy. Okay? Because our primary focus here is not numbers, just being faithful. Scatter seeds, and let God do the work. Let God do the work. Let me close out here with a final thought for you. I believe the church is going to grow. And I believe the church is continuing to grow spiritually. And as a result of that, we will begin to experience more of this. And someone said to me, they said, my concern, they're very honest, they're not here this morning right now with us. They said, my concern and the concern of others, some people, like a lot of people have said, like they really like the small community feel. This person, these are the exact words that the person said. They said, most people I've spoken with find the small numbers here an asset. And so this person said, like, I don't want to invite other people for that reason. And I offer to you that we are called to be faithful. And my hope, and I think someone said it during the discussion group, is I think there is only a certain size community that is effective to shepherd. Like, God didn't call us to be ranchers, He called us to be shepherds. Okay? There's a big difference between a rancher and a shepherd. Okay? He calls us to shepherd. And so as the community grows, my hope is that this phenomenon starts happening. And so we begin to send people out and say, it's time to go plant another church. It's time to go plant another church. You 50 families, go plant another church. And continue to be a community of healing where you're at. No one here, I think, is interested in building an empire. We just want to be part of the kingdom of God. We want little communities to spring up to continue building people up in the kingdom of God. And for those who are challenged by focusing on numbers, this phenomenon is very difficult for you. I shared this with one of my buddies who's a priest, and he said, you want to send people away from your church at some point? I said, yeah. I mean, once you get to a certain size, it's ineffective. Like you can't shepherd, you can't disciple 1,000 families, folks. I don't think that's practical. Okay? So at a certain point, we're going to have to multiply, God willing. But where that comes from, where that growth comes from, is from our own spiritual growth to start with. Okay? That's where I want us. That's the stage I believe we're at right now, is focusing on our own spiritual growth. And the other stuff will come in time. All right? Any questions? Any questions?